Hey, this is Ant from YPN, and this is my favorite part of the job where I get to talk to a real life property investor about their real life deals. And today, this is a great one today because it's my favorite property strategy put into practice by one of our YPN members and someone who bumped into our editor, Alex, some months ago and just happened to talk about the deal. And now here he is in the pages of YPN and we're talking to him, which is exactly what we love to do. With that very long intro, Tancu, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you about my deal, and hopefully it would sort of provide a bit of inspiration to some of the readers as I've been reading the magazine for a few years now, really on the fences before actually starting this particular project until I really had, a bit of motivation to actually just to get started, really. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to.
Okay. It's brilliant to have you on. And I love the fact that this is your first deal that we're talking about today. And you've gone on to be looking at and doing other things in property. And that we're definitely going to cover those as well. But I always think the first deal is the hardest. There's so many unknowns. And the biggest barrier is that fear barrier beforehand of like, I don't know about you, but I definitely couldn't afford to get it wrong on my first deal. It would have been really painful. So, and this is my favorite strategy. So let's find out a bit about you pre-property before we talk about this. So what was life before property investment?
So yeah, I started my first development last year. Prior to that, so I've been looking into property investing development for the past 3 or 4 years, really. The fact that I didn't really have anyone around me doing property, investing in property was quite challenging. I'm currently a policy official. I work at the Ministry of Justice, working on judicial pensions policy. And prior to that, I worked on aviation policy at the Department for Transport. And then I had a stint at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I've always had a mindset where I've wanted to do something for myself and for my family. And back in 2021, um, I started from scratch and owned a cafe coffee shop in a trendy part of East London. And this was actually my first exposure to property development because it previously used to be an optician, and I effectively carried out the development and converted it into a coffee shop. I've sold that business back in 2023. Reason being, I started it for my family, and then things sort of changed. At the same time, I was employed full time as a policy official. In terms of getting started in property, so I was listening to your typical podcasts, and I didn't really know where to start. And then I started to sort of attend networking events to get my head around a few things, and some of the strategies. There's a lot of buzzwords online.
It's a really confusing time, that, isn't it? Because you're like, everything sounds awesome. And so where do you start and how do you begin to kind of understand what's just the sizzle and what's the reality in each of those strategies, I guess?
Exactly. And I was more leaning towards, your standard vanilla buy-to-lets. And I actually took a trip up to Alex's neck of the woods. I went to Nottingham, actually, and I actually did put an offer in for a property up there. But then I had this moment, at the time I was reading, magazines, the YPN magazines, and I could see a lot of great stuff members, readers, have been doing where people were recycling the cash or able to go again and sort of, in raising private finance, etc. I just knew to myself, I had this feeling where there's more, not that there's anything wrong with buy to lets, but I was in a position where, as you say, I didn't have a large amount of capital where I could kind of invest in a few buy to lets. It was just that one buy to let and then, see what happens. I just wanted to kind of extend that and see how far my cash can stretch. And at the time, I joined a property community where they actually focused on the 1 to 2 bed flip strategy. And actually the members there, some of them were beginners like myself who hasn't started a project. And some of them were on the third and fourth. And that really sort of helped me get started because the person that ran the actual community had, 10 years of experience doing that particular strategy. Plus there were people that I could lean onto in terms of getting their views on particular, potential projects, as well as leverage off, their experience and also the collective sort of in-house power team. And what I mean by the power team is the professionals, so your architects, your brokers, etc. And still, with all of that sort of assurances, I was still hesitant because I didn't have a large amount of capital. This was sort of my first rodeo, my first opportunity. If I get it wrong, then it could have significant repercussions because this is my savings. And there isn't
Well, it can wipe you out, can't it? Let's be
exactly,
honest.
especially with me being a beginner, you kind of overthink. You overthink the risks. Then even after finding a deal, having it sort of validated by, you know, other individuals who have experience in the 1 to 2 bed flips, I was still a bit hesitant because of overthinking the risks. And then my mindset sort of shifted when, I sort of said to myself, what's the risk? What's the risk relative to the actual reward? The risk could be, I guess, in cash terms, you lose your money, but what's the actual reward? It could lead to a multi-million pound portfolio or other opportunities where you learn from the experience and meet other sort of people and then sort of do other things in life. So, and then there was this sort of quote that I came across, and it was, which I still with today. It's there is never a perfect condition, right? You can't prepare for anything. The best way to prepare is by action. And that's how I sort of live my life now. Whenever I see opportunities, whenever I speak to people and, people that are effectively doing what I want to do and who I aspire to be like, that's how they operate. And that's how their sort of mindset works. They see an opportunity. They don't overthink the risks. Obviously, you do have to think about it and ensure you're making a calculated risk. But you learn on the go. You learn on the go, and it makes you stronger in the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So let's tell me about this property. You've joined a community where it's, and what a great thing to do, where it's explicitly about this one strategy. So 1 beds to 2 beds, that immediately, accelerates your knowledge base massively from just starting from scratch. How do you go about finding the property? I always think if you know exactly what you're looking for, it's easier. So you're not going into an estate agent and saying, show me all your good property deals, so in which case they'll just show you some properties that they have for sale. So what were the criteria? So it was, what, tired, rundown, like what was it you were looking for and how did you find this one?
Yeah. So at the start of my journey, well, when I got to that point, I knew at that point what I wanted to do. And it's always easier when you know exactly what you want, which strategy you want to adopt and what you want to do. So I knew I wanted a 1 bed flat in London where it's tired. I know I could add the value to it by not necessarily increasing the square footage, but actually reconfiguring the internal layout in a very smart way where it opens up more space, even though the square footage doesn't change. Once I understood what I wanted to do, it sort of put me on a narrow path where I was looking at deals, analyzing deals, looking at sort of analyzing floor plans. And it's easy to kind of be swayed through, I guess, Chinese penny syndrome. But being part of the community, people knew what I was looking for. And this particular deal was actually from a deal sourcer and they understood what I wanted. It was on the open market. I must have missed it somehow. And it was sourced to me by a deal sourcer. And you know, I was effectively looking for a 1 bed flat in London, if we go into the specifics, not in a purpose built block, but rather than sort of your period conversion. So your Victorian building or your Georgian building. So somewhere where it's attractive that had a private garden or a courtyard, some outside space. And I knew who my target market was on the back end when I do flip it. I knew I wanted to flip it and sell it to sort of a couple first-time buyers, maybe with a small family. So I needed that outside space. I needed 2 bedrooms and in a desirable location. Crystal Palace is in an, it's an affluent part of an area in London, and I knew exactly what I wanted. And I think that definitely helps because it puts you on the path and the opportunities where you may have missed, or when people or sources or sort of people that you meet in this space, if they know exactly what you want, they're able to share some of the deals that might not be suitable for them.
So it gets presented to you. How did you get comfortable with the numbers? How did you get comfortable with what's this thing going to cost me to undertake the work? It's because it wasn't just a lick of paint on this one, was it, by any stretch of the imagination? And then and we'll talk about the refurb in a minute, and how did you get comfortable with the end value? So, yeah, how do you get to that point?
So let me first say that I actually received an appraisal from the deal sourcer, and my appraisal came in nearly double. So always do your own due diligence and do not rely on others. How I sort of felt comfortable with the numbers and felt comfortable with the development and the build, I leveraged the power team within the community. So I knew the actual professionals were that I'm going to be using were used by other members of the community multiple times. So I knew that, I'm not going off with a random person. I'm going with people that understand the 1 to 2 bed conversion, that have done it several times and have experience in terms of, well, a lot of experience in terms of what I want to do. And that's from the architect to the builders to, the solicitor to the broker. So from the very beginning, I leveraged, and that's why the community and a group is great because you've got a head start in terms of your power team, which can be tricky if you're starting from scratch. I effectively got the professionals. So I got the architects, the builders, even the estate agent. So I understood what I wanted to do, how I'm going to get there, and what my intentions are so that the estate agent can actually see the plan throughout its inception. So I've got them all together. We went into the property. We talked about, my plans, how we're going to get there, and what it's going to look like on the back end. The professionals all there at the same time, working collectively and actually understanding everything, not just, say the architect not understanding what's required from the actual development from builder, and the builder was advised. Sometimes you may get, I think this happened to me where the bath tub which the architect drew, like kind of suggested, wasn't sufficient in terms of the actual build. So you do get those disparities where it's always good to have, certain professionals speaking to each other. In terms of me getting comfortable, going back to that question, sorry, I'd like to I digress a little bit. It's just effectively having everyone at the property understanding collectively what I would like to do and collectively kind of agreeing how we're going to get there to achieve the GDD, which the agent suggests based on market comparables and, having an idea in terms of what I'm going to be doing to the actual property.
Okay, great. So could you talk us through some headline numbers, and then we'll talk about the actual conversion process and what you did. So tell us a little bit about the numbers.
So purchase price was 325,000. It was initially listed for £350,000, and then the source actually agreed, the 25k discount and presented that to me. So purchased at 325,000. The fees in terms of purchasing was around 15k. The build costs, so labor and materials, came in at 70k. So I call it miscellaneous costs, but that's sort of my architect, building controls, design, etc. That coming at 15k. And I sold, well, subject to contract, currently through legals, £475,000, which leaves me with a profit of £50,000. That's the headline numbers.
And that's an awesome deal for your first project. You know, it's a fantastic one. It's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of work, and I saw you kindly sent me some of the pictures of the work that needed to be done. Can you talk that through and tell me, how did you go about converting a 1 bedroom to a 2 bedroom? What needed to be done in terms of the work to do that, and then what else did you need to do to the flat to transform it into like the amazing place that I'm looking at right now?
So I, going back to sort of stretching my cash and adding value, I always knew that in order to add value, there needs to be some form of development. A 1 to 2 bed strategy fitted that specification, that requirement, because it's a way to add value, albeit a small scale development, but it's still a development, and you actually follow the same principles as you would do, compared to a medium sized development. So, the flat was on the ground floor, has a nice private garden. There's 2 flats above. It's a Victorian building, and actually leaving, so the garden, the back door, when you come out of it, you're faced with the Crystal Palace Park. And it's a 2-minute walk away from the station. So I knew the property would be desirable if it's, done up to a very high standard. And it being a 2 bed, so a 1 bed's usually, I guess, singles or couples without family, but a 2 bed caters for a wider audience, wider target market. And I worked with my architect in terms of how to, rejig the layout to increase not the square footage, but the actual space to be able to add a second bedroom. And we worked on it where we effectively, the kitchen the previous kitchen had a utility room at the back, and then it goes into the previous bathroom. So it was sort of a very dated layout where you had to go through the kitchen to get to the bathroom. I'm sure you've probably seen some of those properties. We effectively knocked down those walls to create a large open plan living kitchen area. At the front of the property, obviously the living room was at the front of the property. We brought that to the back where the newly open plan area was formed. And to create that, we had to knock down a load bearing wall. So I did need a structural engineer because we used one single beam, steel beam on one of the walls at the back. So we moved the living room from the front to the back, created one big space for the open plan living room. And in that room at the front, where it used to be a living room, we converted that into a master bedroom. But it was it was a decent sized bedroom where we even put an ensuite there. So that's a master bedroom with an ensuite. In the existing bedroom, we kept it as a bedroom, but made it slightly smaller. So in between, that's where we've moved the bathroom. In between the master bedroom and the second bedroom, we've put the bathroom there. There was also this, so it's a Victorian building. It had really nice Victorian features. So I wanted to retain that character, again, increasing its attractiveness and retaining that sort of history. There was this beautiful fireplace, which was in the previous living room. So we kind of pulled that out and we moved that into the newly created open plan living area. We've also retained some of the stained, colorful tiles, glass above the bay windows at the front. In terms of, so it was really going back to brick, really going back to the floorboards. It was really in a shell condition, and it was refurbing pretty much new electrics.
What was it like when you saw it? Was it kind of okay and just dated, or was it a wreck when you first walked in?
It was okay. It was, it was tired. The property was tired.
Yeah.
But it was okay. And actually, my builders were surprised because they have done this several times, right, for people in the community. They even said it themselves that actually this was one of the more smoother refurbs that they did in terms of a 1 to 2 bed, going back to brick in a Victorian, in a period converted building. So I was fortunate in that sense, and I'm a I'm a bit of a, you know, I like to do things the right way. So not like a bit of a perfectionist. I guess you could say. The internals, the actual flat was really nice, done up at a really high spec, right? High end. The front of the property, or even the community areas, they were still tired. So I said, I said to myself, I have to do it. It's so nice inside. It has to sort of have that consistency with the externals and the community areas. So I refurbished the communal areas to increase its curb appeal. There was this old artificial lawn at the front of the property, which I don't know why it was there. And it was all like burnt like cigarette butts, and it was like changing color. It was really awful. So effectively removed that, leveled the front lawn because it was all sort of weird and bumpy. Leveled it, made it flat, and we put off-white pebbles. So it really looked nice at the front. I even asked the builders to kind of create a bespoke bin storage to keep the bin storage at the front of the property organized and tidy, a bit more tidy, and repainted the externals of the building to give it that sort of fresh look, as well as painting the walls inside and replacing the actual carpets. So pretty much, and I've done I've done pretty much the flat, the communals.
Everything. Yeah.
I did go over
And
my
was there any contribution from the other leaseholders at this point, or you just saying, I'm just taking this on the chin, this price, this cost, because I know I need the curb appeal for the end buyer?
Yeah, I just took it on the chin. I just wanted to make sure. I guess I was a bit more conscious of the fact that it's my first development and I want to get it right, and I want to make sure I do the most, or go above and beyond, maybe more than I should have. But I just thought it was necessary, really, for.
Well, I'm sure it would have been a lot more challenging to sell if someone had turned up and it looked, not great from outside, and the communal area is, putting people off. I'm positive that would have been a lot more difficult for you to actually achieve the sale on it, had that been the case. Talking about the 1 bed to 2 bed strategy, and just kind of helping anyone reading the article or watching this about the kind of legalities of that. So one of the sort of great things is that you don't need planning permission to do this, but there are other things that kind of do need to be in place.
Yeah.
So how did this work? Did you have to get the kind of permission of the other leaseholders in the property? And if that's the case, how did you go about doing that?
So yeah, you don't need planning permission, as you say. However, you do need consent from the other leaseholders. I mean, the freeholders are, it's a share of freehold. There's 3 flats in the building, so all three of us own the share of freehold. So I didn't have to, um, seek consent from the actual freeholder. I mean, the freeholders were us. It's a little bit easier when you're dealing with individuals than companies, because I guess it's a little bit more difficult to kind of get hold of the responsible person, and sort of it's more of a checklist exercise for companies. But in terms of, it's a people business, right? It's just making sure you get on with your neighbors, make sure you get on with your team, your people, and not cause any problems. And I had the conversations very early on. I actually brought one of the owners upstairs to the flat downstairs and said, "Look, it's in a really bad state." And I actually went through everything I wanted to do um, to the flat, the 1 to 2 bed. I was fortunate that he has a construction background, so he was a bit more, I guess, understanding, and it, didn't have any troubles with agreeing consent. The other owner of the flat, he rents it out. I just got his number from the other owner of the flat and just spoke to him, and just being open. And when you do position yourself where you're doing it in the right way, I've used architects, I've used a structural engineer, I've got building controls permission. Building controls effectively have to agree with the work you're doing, right? If you position yourself in a way where you're doing the right thing, you're bringing the property up to the current required building standards and actually making it more safer, then it makes things a little bit more easier.
And so just expanding on the building control bit, because I think this is an area which a lot of people, if they were where you were, before you did this deal or sometime before that, they won't understand this process. So at what point are building control involved? Is it the initial consultation stage or signing the work off, or is it kind of throughout that? And did you use a kind of private building control contractor, or did you use the kind of local authority?
So I've heard negative stories about using local authority. So I've used a private building control. When I say negative, I mean they do take a little bit more time. And I, worked with my architect, structural engineer, and contacted a private building control company who my architect actually recommended to me. And it's pretty simple, really. You kind of just go through you explain what you're doing. I sent over the drawings, the structural drawings, structural engineer drawings, and they agree. Well, they agreed. I mean, because it's a small scale development, there wasn't much. It was only just removing the load bearing wall at the back and installing the steel beam. That was really the bit which was of interest, and it was pretty straightforward. It was a straightforward process. During the actual build, building controls only came to visit after the steel beam was installed. So before it was all decorated. At the point when it was installed, we had to inform building controls, and they came out, and it was just, yeah, they were happy with it. I mean, as I said, it was a small scale development, but it is something that we have to adhere to make sure that we do the right things. And I think they wanted to see, because I moved the bathroom, they wanted to just see sort of the drainage, but that was only pictures uploaded onto their sort of system. And also, sorry, the fire doors. They also wanted, because I replaced the doors to fire doors, they wanted to just make sure we were using the right doors. And that was it. And those were pictures as well. I've got a funny story about, sort of interesting story about party wall. So this was a terrace building, right? I was fortunate that the right side, I didn't need to worry about it because it was the private garden, so there was no adjacent wall. But the left hand side of it went into next door. So I had to agree with I've had to agree with the flats upstairs, but that was relatively simple because of relationships with I've already got consent in terms of doing the actual works, and it was just mentioning sort of the same things really, and that was pretty simple, straightforward. But next door, I had none of their contact details, and I knocked on the door. There was no answer. I'd done this multiple times, and I couldn't get through to next door. So I had to get a little bit creative. I searched up sort of the HM land registry and searched the titles to see who the freeholder and leaseholder was. And I noticed that the leaseholder and the freeholder were two different. So the leaseholder was an individual, so the person that actually bought the flat, but the freeholder owned the building. And it was a company. And I tracked down the company on LinkedIn and found the director of the company on LinkedIn. And this individual was living out in Dubai. So I just messaged them on LinkedIn to say, look, I've bought next door. I'm doing sort of positioning myself in a similar position where, a similar way where, I mentioned that I'm doing things in the right way, instructed building controls, structural engineer. So everything is, you know, being done to actually improve the building standards. And he sent me his email address to send an email to him. And I was very transparent, and I sent over the structural engineers, the architect, and also the building control notice and the party wall notice to give, you know, the 2 weeks notice. We actually approached, it was right on 2 weeks where, um, if you don't, if you don't receive a response or don't, uh, you know, if you don't receive a response, then I would need to instruct sort of an independent party wall surveyor for next door as well, which was going to sort of double my cost with party wall notices. So I reached out and I sent another email to the person, and he actually got back to me on sort of the last minute and said he's fine with the works to go ahead, and he's spoken with the leaseholder of downstairs, the next door, and they were happy as long as, of course, as long as it doesn't cause any structural damages to the building, and I would be liable to that. And of course, that's what it is. And it meant that I didn't have to instruct a surveyor, not only saving myself, money in terms of having a surveyor act on my behalf, but also a surveyor act on the leaseholder as well as the freeholder, which would have been actually triple the cost. But I didn't actually have to pay any money at the end. So that was a bit of a result.
That's a real result. Absolutely. Tell me about the sale of the property then. How do you go about choosing an agent that you're going to sell it using? Who's your target market? What was the level of interest in it? And did it sell to the kind of your anticipated market?
So I actually in terms of choosing my agent, again, I went with a recommendation, someone that specializes in the area. So I didn't go with your sort of national companies. I went with an independent agent, but specializes in the Crystal Palace area and has been used by other people in the property group that I was in at the time, on multiple occasions. So I went with them, and I could tell they were different because I did have 3 agents come in at the time, and you could tell. I had one agent telling me that they could get more than £500,000, £515,000. I had one agent that said they could achieve 450,000. This agent, I went with the recommendation. We didn't really speak about GDVs. We had a figure in mind, but not a sort of specific figure in terms of what we're going to market it as. And they came on exactly what sort of the area where what I wanted and thought, compared to sort of market comparables. And they said we could get up, 470 to 475 they could achieve in today's market. And that's exactly what we achieved. So again, I sold it initially for 5. Again, something that I learned, those buyers pulled out after 3 weeks, and that was because we couldn't start the process because the actual title wasn't registered in my name. Because at that point, I think it was only like 3-4 months, 4 months, I think it was, in terms of me purchasing it and then going back on the market. It was about just over 4 months, and I think it typically takes 6 months for land registry to be updated, right? So I didn't, it being my first development, I didn't really know that, and no one really advised me at the time. Then my solicitors, said we need to expedite the process in terms of getting it registered on land registry sooner, which spooked those buyers because I think they were advised that they don't know how long it would take, even though it took 2 weeks, but they were spooked and they were in a bit of a rush because they were selling their house in Scotland, and the system over there is different. Once you accept an offer, I think it's binding, right? So they had to kind of find a place. They were moving to London soon. Yeah, that's again part of the learning process. But we went back on the market, and again, we agreed 475, and it's currently with legals, hopefully in the next month.
Okay, fantastic. And so, with this one under your belt, what's next in property? Because you talked about, kind of assessing risk, but not letting that fear, which is very real for all of us, kind of put you off, assessing the risk, mitigating the risk, but moving forward with confidence. So does that mean, is that more 1 bed to 2 beds, or a change of strategy completely, or where do you see the kind of your next stage in property?
So this particular project was, the actual result, looking back now, reflecting, not just the profit, but in terms of the opportunities and in terms of the people that I've met. Like, I converted a 1 bed flat in Crystal Palace into a 2 bed, a high-end 2 bed, 2 bath with a private garden. It was a great first experience, more than I could ever sort of imagine at the time, looking back, because you're only really focused on how much am I going to make, not the actual journey and all the intangibles that you achieve. Not only did I understand the process of buying a property and selling, but also the process of developing a property and the procedures, the step-by-step things to keep in mind and look out for, because those things, could trip you over, and they are very costly mistakes if you do get it wrong. And what to look out for in terms of structural defects and creative ways to add value to a property. I'm not sure if I mentioned it to you, but this particular project um, you know, I was recognized at the National Property Awards, and I was selected and nominated, selected as a finalist as Young Property Professional of the Year last year, and that was from me because I started documenting it online, and made great friends, great sort of connections in the industry. Uh, Going back to sort of when I started to now, I could I've made friends with people that I aspire to be like, who I want to be like, and I could pick up the phone to them now. Like it's a bit of a weird sort of full circle moment, and it's invaluable. Like you can't really put price on it. People focused, especially at the start, you focus on the actual money you're making, the profit that you're making, whereas that's secondary to all the intangibles. So the experience, the you developing as someone that could develop property and the expertise and skills that you obtain on the way, the connections you make. And, if I had one advice to people that are a little bit on the fence is don't worry about too much on, yes, obviously you want to make a profit, but that's not really important. The most important part is actually learning and taking the step forward and the opportunities that it presents. Going forward, I want to continue with projects. I understand that I don't want to sort of tie my money, my capital, because I don't have a unlimited amount, right? But it's projects where I can add value. So my next project is I like to, I'm going to convert a house into a HMO commute to towns close to London. So within like an hour commute to London. So it's really converting 3-bed houses. And again, going back into being specific and understanding what exactly you want. And it makes things a little bit easier, especially when you're identifying potential properties. My specifics is, they have to be minimum 85 square meters, 3-bed houses that haven't been extended or done any sort of loft conversion or garage conversion to it, and not in an Article 4 area, because I don't want to deal with planning at this stage until I gain a little bit more experience in this field. My plan is to convert into 6-bed HMOs outside of Article 4 areas, but within sort of commute to London, to attract young professionals who are moving, potentially moving down from other parts of the UK to London to work. And that's what I'm doing next. And then I've got a bit of a plan after that. Aim is sort of next year or I guess within 2 years is to get into commercial conversions. So converting commercial property into residential. And that's the plan going forward.
Well, we can't wait to tell, our members of our community about your next deals as well. It's brilliant, talking about this first one today, and it's going to be amazing kind of tracking your progress as you develop as well. And so hopefully we'll definitely invite you back to talk through those. If for anybody watching this, listening to this, or reading it, either online or in the hard copy magazine, if they wanted to kind of reach out, follow you and learn a bit more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. And anyone can reach out to me. I'm always open to speaking, sort of just helping wherever possible. So I'm on Instagram, and it's Yilmaz, Yilmaz Invests, Yilmaz Invest on Instagram, and also on LinkedIn. So it's my full name, just Tancu with a C, Yilmaz. You can find me, just drop me a message. Let's connect.
Okay, amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today, Tanchi. We couldn't do what we do with YPN, without people like yourselves. And I hope you don't mind me using this phrase. I do use it a lot as, ordinary people who do achieve extraordinary things in property by moving themselves out of their comfort zone, surrounding themselves with other people who kind of normalize this thing in property. So we don't feel like we're out on our own and doing this on our own. So a huge thanks from me and all of our communities for coming on and sharing this deal today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Learn from people who've been there and done it. Real investors, real lessons. YPN.plus.